Hi everybody, my name is Tyler Linder, and I'm the project scientist for iData. I'm also an asteroid astronomer, and I'm coming to you from my basement. We just recently moved, so my basement is still a mess. And if you look in the background, we have the vacuum cleaner, boxes, a dresser that's not in the right location. So after I get done with this, I've got to get back to unpacking the new house. So I've heard that you guys have just watched a video about asteroids impacting Earth. And I wanted to talk to you about some of the risk and the threat level and how concerned you should be. Right now, we do not know of any asteroids that are on a collision course with Earth. And the reason we know this is that we use a series of telescopes around the world to not only discover them, but also to monitor their positions. One of the biggest problems that both NASA and ESA, the European Space Agency, are trying to solve is to determine when an asteroid becomes a threat. So there's two criteria for an asteroid to be a threat to Earth. The first, the orbit of the asteroid must cross Earth's orbit. Now, out of all of the asteroids that we know, this is very difficult to do. However, some asteroids come really, really close. The second condition that must be met is the Earth and the asteroid must be at the same place at the same time. Now, this is the really challenging part. Earth goes around the sun every 365 days. Now, it's only in a small portion of its orbit and a completely different portion every day. So we could have an asteroid that crosses Earth's orbit multiple times in one orbit, but it would never be a risk because it's not synchronized with Earth's orbit. So what we look for is those two conditions. A, does the orbit cross Earth? And B, would the Earth and asteroid be at the same point at the same time? Before we could move an asteroid, we have to prove it's a threat. And getting the timing right when we're trying to predict something 75, 100 years in the future is extremely difficult. So how we do this is there's a few large telescopes. The main ones are in Arizona called Spacewatch, and Pan-STARRS, which is in Hawaii. They scan the sky every 28 days looking for all of the new asteroids. Majority of the time, they find main belt asteroids, which of course orbit between Mars and Jupiter, and are no hazard to Earth. In that same process, we're actually able to find near-Earth asteroids. And this is where my work comes in. After a near-Earth asteroid is discovered, my job is to build the orbit, and we call this orbit refinement. So imagine this. Imagine that you're driving on a road, driving on a highway, and you drive 10 miles and you stop. Can you predict where you will be in a year? That analogy is the same for asteroids. If we have only seen and known about the asteroid for, say, 10 or 12 days, it's really difficult to predict where it will be a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. So how we go about this is that we observe it for now, then we'll come back in a week and observe it again, and then another week and another week for as long as possible, so that when we get 4 or 5 years worth of orbit, we can now with certainty predict 75 years in the future. But what about asteroid rotation rates? So if an asteroid is determined to be a threat, we need to be able to make some predictions about it. Like, how big is it? How massive is it? If you have a collision with Earth, a feather does no damage compared to a bowling ball. It's the same analogy. The larger and more massive, the more energy it will have when it impacts Earth. So one of the methods we can study these is to determine their rotation rate. And the reason is the faster the rotation rate, the stronger and heavier it must be to not fly apart. So imagine you putting in your hand some sand. You go to the beach, you pick up some sand. Now, if you have in your hand, open palmed hand, with your hand up, your fingers out, sand in a pile, if you start spinning around, that sand will fly away. That's the same concept with asteroids. In space, if an asteroid is a rubble pile where it's just a bunch of sand and rocks, if it starts rotating too fast, it will fly apart. So a part of the iData project is to introduce and start doing asteroid light curves so that we can study the asteroid population and determine what are the common rotation rates. And then it allows scientists to do more advanced analysis on the population as a whole so that we have a better prediction of what that asteroid could be when we find one that is a threat.